I just finished watching the Orville for the third time. It's a Star Trekian comedy sci-fi series, but it has some seriously deep social commentary. It basically imagines us, humanity, in the 25th century. And there's this great episode that really stuck with me this time around. It's the series finale.
Captain, I'm receiving a message from Sargus 4.
From the researchers? I thought we were supposed to contact them.
It starts when the crew of the Orville get a message from another planet, one that's not too dissimilar from our Earth today. The message is from Lysella, who's been trying to contact them for a really long time. Lysella knows about the Orville, but she's the only one on her planet. The crew accidentally revealed their origin on a covert operation in a previous episode. But when they left, Lysella couldn't stop thinking about all the wonders that she'd seen on board the ship. You see, her home planet has a lot of problems like poverty, water shortage, corruption, and fear-mongering. Societal problems that we also have in our world.
Everyone's scared and paranoid because nobody trusts each other.
And after seeing life on the Orville, she can't stand to live there anymore. Even with her relatively comfortable middle-class life, she wants out. So they give her refuge. The commander, Kelly, is appointed to help Lysella acclimatize to everything. It's her new home now, so she needs someone to guide her through a very new way of living here.
Welcome to the galaxy.
As Kelly shows her around, she displays all of the technologies that Lysella has only been dreaming about time and time again. And that's when Kelly tells her about the technology that changed everything for them, the matter synthesizer.
It was the single most transformative moment in our history. When all your material needs are provided for at no cost, changes the entire game.
The matter synthesizer is a technology that can literally materialize goods. A synthesizer that can reproduce any item requested just with some programming.
You know, just this could change the world back on my planet. Even just one of these synthesizer things.
In the 25th century timeline of the Orville, these synthesizers have become ubiquitous. Everyone has them. And we see this time and time again throughout the show. It's always one of the highlights for me.
We must have more. 500 cigarettes.
Now there's more to Lysella's story, and we'll get to that. But first, let's start with the underlying idea here. The idea behind scarcity. When I watched this scene, I couldn't help but think that the show was giving us a thought experiment. What happens when a society moves beyond scarcity? This has been a central topic of debate actually, pretty much since the Industrial Revolution. But scholars, particularly Marxists, have long argued that technology has the potential to help us move beyond a paradigm where scarcity is manufactured. The problem, they point out, is that capitalism thrives on scarcity. For example, instead of letting the common resources we have like land or water or even information now, instead of letting it be accessible to everyone, our current system rewards enclosing these resources, privatizing them. Think of water, for example. It's abundant and essential, so it should really be free. And that's also why it's an international human right. But once it's bottled and sold by corporations like Nestle, for example, it stops being a common resource, and instead it becomes a commodity. What Nestle has done here is basically manufacture the scarcity of water. This is something that's referred to as artificial scarcity. And it's when the value of a good is driven up, but artificially. So those who sell it can make a profit. But the problem here, of course, is that it's now harder for the average person to access what they need. And labor works in a similar way, actually. In our society, we have to sell our time and effort to put food on the table, right? If we're deprived of free access to essential commons like land and water, even though they might be abundant and can be distributed, even with our current technology, they can only be acquired with money. And for most of us, money is scarce. People then have to chase money to survive, and that becomes life's purpose for a lot of people. And eventually, even our time becomes scarce too because of that. We've even started to equate our time with earning potential. But let's say, like in the Orville, we had a next level technology like the matter synthesizer. Would it be possible to disrupt this cycle then? Well, possible, yes, of course, but think about how we actually have technology to make things better right now, but that it isn't always put to good use.
People in the United States can't afford insulin. The average price for one vial of insulin is about $285.
Why, for example, do so many people still die from treatable diseases like diabetes or high blood pressure when we have life-saving medications and technology like insulin pumps or blood pressure monitors? Of course, there are logistical issues, but these tools exist and could dramatically improve way more lives than they currently do.
Forget about the patent system being about progressing the sciences and the arts, as the Constitution says. It's become a business strategy.
And this isn't some idealization either. In Denmark, where I grew up, for example, every national universally has access to insulin. The technology is actually there, but the systems we have in place reward profit over accessibility. Pharmaceutical companies don't turn a profit if their insulin is affordable. So it's not as simple as having the right technology. And this brings us right back to Lysella's story. After learning about the matter synthesizer, Lysella actually wants to go back to her planet. It's weird, I know, but she wants to share the technology with her people. Basically so she can help her world, help those who are suffering unnecessarily, but she needs to bring the synthesizer to do that.
Why couldn't you help them? Why couldn't you share your technology? I mean, there are whole countries that barely have clean water. This could save millions of lives.
Unfortunately for her, the crew of the Orville have this non-interventionist policy, right? So they actually deny her plea. She's still welcome to return, of course, but just not with the technology. But why, she thinks? She can't let that thought go. So she starts to feel guilty. And that guilt eventually builds up to the point that she decides to return home anyway. But as she gets on the ship to go back, an alarm goes off. Kelly seems to know what's happening here. She asks Lysella to see her bag, and for good reason. In it, she's caught with blueprints for how to create the matter synthesizer. And this is where things get particularly interesting. You might be thinking the same thing as Lysella, right? Why can't she help her home world? The answer to all of her society's problems are basically right there.
Come with me. I want to show you something.
So, Kelly leads Lysella to an environmental simulator and shows her the answer. The simulator depicts real events that happened on another planet, where a society at the same developmental stage as Lysella's once flourished. But on this planet, the Union, which is the organization behind the Orville, introduced advanced technology before the planet's society was ready for it. And when they got it, it didn't go so well for them. What's really interesting about this is that the conversation between Kelly and Lysella very much mirrors the discussion about technology, money, and work that's being debated in our world today. And since coming technologies like AI and quantum computing promises to change everything for us, it's more relevant to talk about than ever. So let's address the question: why isn't technology by itself enough? There's a Japanese scholar, Kohei Saito, who lays it out very neatly in his latest book from 2024. It's called Slow Down. He writes that capitalism manufactures artificial scarcity to perpetuate itself, and this makes abundance its natural enemy. In other words, even if Lysella brought back the matter synthesizer to her world, the underlying rules that govern the capitalist logic here would likely find ways to make the technology exclusive, expensive, or restricted. And similarly, in our world, if we had something like the matter synthesizer, most likely only the wealthy would have access to it, and they would restrict it, because if not, abundance would disrupt the profit-driven system that's rewarded them. We've seen this play out in our world too. The Industrial Revolution brought us new machines that could produce goods faster and more efficiently than ever before. But instead of freeing up people's time, the machines were used to ramp up production, not to reduce work hours. Think about how our technology has advanced tremendously since just 100 years ago. But still, we haven't had a work reform since then, despite our newfound capacity for productivity. The status quo is still to work 8 hours per day, and it has been for a century. Sure, there's talk about a 4-day work week, but that's been due for centuries now. Okay, but maybe we need to think a bit differently about the matter synthesizer, because this isn't just some productivity booster, it's basically the ultimate technology. It outright just eliminates the need for production. It could basically eliminate scarcity altogether, which might be what Lysella is thinking too. But let's be honest, if we got the synthesizer in our world today, do you really think that the most powerful and wealthy people in charge of producing this technology would give up their relative privilege and status so that everyone could access it? Hopefully, yeah, but realistically, probably no. Billionaires already have way more money than they need, and at this point it's just a number on a screen for them. But they still all seem to dedicate their lives to earning even more money despite the consequences. They've gotten power hungry, and even those who once had an altruistic goal seem to have been corrupted now. If we developed this technology right now, it would probably be locked behind paywalls or controlled by corporations. And not just to keep profits flowing, but to ensure that profit itself still remains the dominant logic of our society. Basically, so that capitalism survives. This is the reality that the crew on the Orville want to avoid. And that's why they don't intervene in Lysella's home planet. Without systemic change beforehand, even groundbreaking technology could become just another tool for maintaining inequality.
Nation-states fought each other. Wars broke out everywhere because they all wanted to use the advancements for personal gain and for political dominance. They wiped themselves out in 5 years. 9 billion people. Gone.
Just gonna pause here for a second. I put hundreds of hours into these scripts and videos, and your support really helps me out a lot. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a like and subscribe too. It really means a lot. Alright, back to it. In the Orville, representative democracy has flourished, and corruption seems to be almost non-existent.
One thing you can say for democracy is that all other forms of government are even worse.
Society here has long ago reached a point in which the ubiquity and prominence of money and profit isn't bringing out the worst in them. They've moved beyond it. It's basically a time that's ripe for a technology like the matter synthesizer. So, back to the story. After a few days, Kelly sits down with Lysella in the mess hall. She's decided to stay after all. I don't blame her, but there's still something bothering her. You see, Lysella doesn't understand why everyone here is working. All of their needs are met, so why bother? And this is where things get interesting. Kelly understands Lysella's puzzlement and tells her, people still work, not because they need to, but because they want to.
See, on your planet, currency is money. In the Union, it's reputation. So if you do something, anything that benefits our society, and you work hard at it, you're rich. And that could be anything.
Now, there are moments in the show where the characters seem to be tired and overworked. So what's the difference really from our world, where we have to work anyway? Well, it really comes down to motivation. Working because you have to versus working because you want to. Having the matter synthesizer as a safety net has allowed the people on the Orville to work on whatever they want. Not just some job they drag themselves to every day to put food on the table, but something they want to get out of bed to do. And this is another great question that the show raises. How would our lives even look in a post-capitalist society where all of our needs are met? Well, even though we have our material needs met, we might still want to work. Not toil, but work. For the crew, it's really not about earning a paycheck, right? It's about finding a purpose in what they do. And it makes sense. Any happiness or longevity study that I've looked at shows that meaningful work is usually a top 3 factor when it comes to being happy. And on top of that, it's also about being a good person, which is motivated here by earning a reputation. Without scarcity and pressure from a money-driven society, people can be good, helpful people. The economist Yanis Varoufakis talks about this distinction. He separates commodity labor, which is the time and skills that we sell for wages, from experiential labor, which is more like the passion, creativity, and effort we put into work that truly matters to us. It's this experiential labor that makes our work meaningful, he says, even if it doesn't always get rewarded in a profit-driven system. If we had the matter synthesizer, we'd have all of our needs met, but we'd probably be bored to death, if not unhappy, just lounging around on our phones all day. I really am when I do that on those days. So while capitalism might have distorted what work means for most, the Orville shows us what work might look like in a different paradigm. And that technology, if done properly in an egalitarian world, might one day let us become better people, working for better reasons. Now you might be thinking, the Orville shows us a great fantasy, but it is just that, a fantasy, a fiction. Real technology depends on real science, not some TV show. Well, yeah, of course, scientific progress depends on research and experimentation, but it actually also needs big, bold ideas, and that's where sci-fi shows like the Orville comes in. In his book, Dark Skies, political scientist Daniel Deudney points out that scientific and technological advances have often been influenced by science fiction. Scientific advances depend not just on painstaking empirical research, but also on imaginative intellectual leaps. Take the Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, for example. His concept of the nuclear chain reaction was inspired by H.G. Wells' A World Set Free. This breakthrough eventually led to nuclear reactors, but unfortunately also nuclear weapons. That's the duality of technology. It is, of course, a reciprocal relationship. Most sci-fi premises have been inspired by scientific breakthroughs. There's no science fiction without actual science. But writers like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells dreamed up voyages to the moon long before we had tools to make it happen. Deudney also points out that most sci-fi isn't written to make a case just for technological progress alone. It's also about the human stories that unfold around it, like Lysella's story. And through these stories, sci-fi often holds a mirror up to our own society. After watching The Orville, I found it easier to take a step back and question the norms in our society, and hopefully you did too watching this. In the end, Lysella decides to remain on The Orville, and I don't blame her.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big learning curve, but I got the right coach. She'll do fine.
The showrunners have recently announced that they plan to release another season, probably sometime this year. I hope we get to see how Lysella integrates into this society. But for now, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I also have a Patreon account where you can support my work. Unfortunately, I still need to put food on the table to make videos. I actually wonder if it'll still make me want to make videos if I had something like a matter synthesizer. I guess my argumentation would suggest, yeah, I would. And here's a video where I talk about post-capitalism in a very different sense.